Thinking constantly about others is often praised. It is labeled as sensitivity, loyalty, emotional intelligence, even love. From a young age, many of us learn that being good means being attentive to everyone else's needs, anticipating their reactions, and adjusting ourselves so no one feels uncomfortable. And so, without realizing it, the mind becomes trained to stay outside, always alert, always scanning, always wondering what the other person might think, feel, or expect. At first, this seems noble, but over time it becomes exhausting. The uncomfortable truth is that much of this constant mental focus on others is not love at all. It is fear wearing a polite mask. Fear of being rejected if you say what you really think. Fear of being abandoned if you set limits. Fear of being judged if you show your true self. And fear, when it takes control of the mind, does not protect you, it shrinks you. When you overthink someone's words, analyze their silences, replay conversations in your head, or imagine scenarios that haven't even happened, you are not connecting with them. You are trying to protect yourself from pain. The mind believes that if it anticipates everything, it can avoid suffering. But this strategy never works. It only creates anxiety, tension, and emotional dependence. There is a subtle but important difference between caring and worrying. Caring allows space. It respects autonomy. Worrying, on the other hand, tries to control outcomes. It tries to predict emotions. It tries to manage how others perceive you. And the moment your emotional stability depends on how someone else behaves, you give away your inner balance. Many people confuse empathy with self-erasure. They believe that to be loving, they must constantly put themselves second, silence their needs, and adapt endlessly. But love that demands you disappear is not love. It is survival. It is the emotional habit of someone who learned that being accepted was more important than being authentic. Overthinking others often comes from old wounds, from moments when you felt you had to earn affection, from times when love felt conditional. So the mind learned to stay alert, to please, to avoid conflict at all costs. And while this may have helped you survive emotionally in the past, it slowly becomes a cage in the present. You start asking yourself questions that have no answers. Did I say something wrong? Why haven't they replied? What if they're upset? And each question pulls you further away from yourself. Your energy goes outward, while your own emotional needs remain unattended. This is how self-neglect begins, not loudly, but quietly. True care does not require mental obsession. You can care deeply and still let go. You can love without monitoring every reaction. You can be present without being consumed. Emotional maturity begins when you understand that other people's emotions are not your responsibility and their reactions are not a measure of your worth. When you stop overthinking others, it doesn't mean you become cold or indifferent. It means you stop living in fear. It means you trust that being yourself is enough, even if it doesn't please everyone. It means you accept that discomfort is part of honesty, and that not everyone has to approve of you for you to be okay. This shift is subtle but powerful. Instead of asking, "What will they think of me?" you begin to ask, "What do I feel? What do I need? What is true for me?" And in that moment, you reclaim your inner authority. You stop negotiating your peace for acceptance. Letting go of overthinking others is not an act of rebellion. It is an act of emotional courage. It is choosing authenticity over approval, calm over anxiety, and self-respect over fear. And when fear no longer drives your attention, love finally becomes free. There is a quiet danger in building your self-worth on the opinions of others. It doesn't arrive suddenly, and it rarely announces itself. It slips in slowly, disguised as motivation, as humility, as the desire to be liked or accepted. At first, external approval feels encouraging. A compliment lifts you. Recognition reassures you. Acceptance calms you. But when these things become necessary rather than pleasant, something fragile forms inside you. When your value depends on how others see you, your inner stability becomes unstable by nature. You rise when you are praised and fall when you are ignored. You feel confident one day and invisible the next. And so your emotional state is no longer rooted in who you are, but in how you are perceived. This is not living from the inside out, it is living on display. The mind starts to negotiate constantly. You measure your words, you soften your opinions, you adjust your behavior, not because you are evolving, but because you are afraid of losing approval. Slowly, authenticity becomes risky, and silence feels safer. And in that process, self-expression is replaced by self-monitoring. External validation is unpredictable. It changes with moods, context, and people's own insecurities. Today you're admired, tomorrow you are forgotten. If your worth is tied to something so unstable, peace becomes impossible. You are always waiting for the next signal, the next reaction, the next confirmation that you are still enough. Many people confuse being valued with having value. Being valued depends on others. Having value is intrinsic. It exists even when no one is watching, applauding, or agreeing with you. But when you grow up in environments where love was conditional, where approval was earned through performance, obedience, or sacrifice, the mind learns to equate acceptance with survival. So you chase it, not because you are weak, but because you are human. The need to belong is natural. The problem arises when belonging requires self-betrayal. When you begin to tolerate disrespect, suppress your needs, or abandon your boundaries just to remain accepted, the cost becomes too high. Self-worth that depends on others creates emotional dependence. You hand over the power to define you, and once someone else holds that power, you become vulnerable to manipulation, guilt, and fear. You start asking permission to be yourself. You hesitate before making choices. You doubt your instincts. And the more you doubt yourself, the more you seek reassurance. The paradox is that the more you seek approval, the less grounded you feel. No amount of praise can fill a space that was meant to be occupied by self-respect. External validation may soothe temporarily, but it never settles deeply. It fades quickly, leaving behind the same hunger. Real self-worth is quiet. It does not need constant confirmation. It is the calm understanding that you are allowed to exist as you are, even when others disagree, disapprove, or walk away. This does not mean becoming rigid or closed. It means being rooted. When you begin to detach your worth from others' opinions, discomfort arises. The mind resists. It fears rejection. It fears being misunderstood. But discomfort is not danger. It is simply the sensation of growth. And growth always asks you to leave behind familiar illusions. You start to realize that not everyone has to like you for your life to have meaning. That disagreement is not a threat. That being unseen by some does not make you invisible to yourself. And slowly the need to perform dissolves. This shift changes everything. Decisions become clearer. Boundaries feel more natural. You stop explaining yourself unnecessarily. You stop shrinking to fit spaces that were never meant to hold you. And in that space of self-recognition, something solid forms. When your worth no longer depends on applause, you become emotionally independent. You can connect without clinging, love without losing yourself, and walk away without guilt when something no longer aligns with your dignity. There is a hidden exhaustion that comes from trying to control what cannot be controlled. It doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it shows up as constant planning, rehearsing conversations in your head, imagining reactions, or preparing explanations you were never asked to give. The mind stays busy, alert, convinced that if it stays one step ahead, it can prevent disappointment, conflict, or rejection. But this is effort, though well-intentioned, slowly drains you. The need to control is often born from uncertainty. When you don't trust outcomes, you try to manage them. When you don't trust people, you try to predict them. And when you don't fully trust yourself, you try to control everything around you. The mind confuses control with safety, even though the two rarely coexist. Trying to manage how others think or feel is an invisible burden. You become responsible for emotions that are not yours. You take on reactions you didn't create. And you exhaust yourself trying to keep everything stable, even when stability is impossible. Life is not a controlled environment, it is a moving, unpredictable experience. Control creates tension. The body tightens. The mind loops. The heart stays guarded. You are never fully present because part of you is always scanning for what might go wrong. Even moments of joy feel fragile, as if they could collapse at any second. This is not peace, it is vigilance. Letting go of control feels frightening at first. The mind resists. It warns you of chaos, loss, and vulnerability. It tells you that if you stop managing everything, something bad will happen. But what actually happens is something very different. Space opens, breath deepens, the nervous system softens. Mental freedom does not mean irresponsibility or indifference. It means understanding the limits of your power. You can influence, but you cannot command. You can express, but you cannot guarantee how it will be received. You can love, but you cannot force reciprocity. Accepting these truths is not weakness, it is wisdom. When you release the illusion of control, you begin to live more honestly. You speak without rehearsing every outcome. You act without calculating every response. You allow others to be who they are, even when that includes disappointment or misunderstanding. And surprisingly, this honesty strengthens your inner stability. Control is exhausting because it keeps you in constant resistance with reality. Letting go is liberating because it aligns you with what is. You stop fighting uncertainty and start coexisting with it. You realize that not knowing is not a failure. It is a condition of being alive. There is also a deep form of self-trust that emerges when control loosens. You begin to trust that you can handle outcomes, even difficult ones. You stop trying to prevent pain at all costs and start trusting your ability to recover, adapt, and grow. This trust is what gives you real confidence. Freedom is not found in perfect outcomes. It is found in psychological flexibility, in the ability to respond rather than react, in knowing that you do not need to control everything to be okay. When you stop micromanaging life, you start participating in it. You also stop over-functioning in relationships. You allow others to take responsibility for their feelings and actions. You step back from emotional management and step into emotional presence. His shift brings healthier connections because it's based on choice, not fear. Letting go of control returns you to the present moment. Instead of living in imagined futures, you inhabit what is happening now, and in the present, anxiety loses much of its power. The mind rests because it no longer has to guard against endless possibilities. When the noise of the outside world begins to fade, something unfamiliar often takes its place. Silence. At first, it can feel unsettling, even uncomfortable. Many people avoid it because silence removes distractions, and without distractions, there is nowhere to hide. The constant thinking about others, the endless analysis, the mental chatter, these all serve a purpose. They keep you busy enough not to listen to yourself. Silence exposes what has been ignored, feelings that were postponed, questions that were avoided, desires that were minimized to fit expectations. When you stop filling every mental space with other people's needs, opinions, and reactions, your own inner world begins to speak. And this is where true self-discovery starts. At first, the voice you hear may not be clear. It might sound confused, tired, or uncertain. That's normal. When you've spent a long time living outwardly, turning inward feels awkward. The mind has forgotten how to listen without judging, how to observe without correcting. But silence is patient. It doesn't demand immediate answers. It simply invites honesty. In that quiet space, you begin to notice ice patterns, the thoughts that repeat, the emotions that surface when there is nothing to distract you. You start to recognize what genuinely nourishes you and what quietly drains you. This awareness doesn't come from effort, it comes from attention, and attention grows naturally in silence. Many people fear silence because they associate it with loneliness, but silence is not absence, it is presence without interference. It is the moment when you are no longer reacting, no longer performing, no longer explaining, you are simply being. And in that state, the need to prove yourself slowly dissolves. Silence allows you to distinguish between what you truly want and what you were taught to want. It separates internal values from external pressure. Without constant noise, the mind becomes less defensive. You stop arguing with yourself. You stop justifying your feelings. You begin to accept them. This is where clarity forms, not the kind that arrives as a sudden revelation, but the kind that settles gradually, like dust falling after movement stops. You start to sense what aligns with you and what doesn't. Certain choices feel lighter. Certain relationships feel heavier. And you don't need to overthink why. You simply know. Self-discovery is not about becoming someone new. It is about remembering who you were before you learn to silence yourself, before you learn to adapt excessively, before you confuse being needed with being valued. Silence helps you return to that original point, not to relive the past, but to reclaim what was left behind. In silence, you also learn to tolerate discomfort. You realize that not every uneasy feeling needs immediate distraction. Some emotions are messages, not problems. When you allow them space, they soften, they pass, and you gain confidence in your emotional resilience. The more comfortable you become with silence, the less dependent you are on external validation. You no longer need constant feedback to feel real. Your sense of self becomes internally anchored, and with that anchoring comes calm. This quiet connection with yourself changes how you relate to the world. You respond instead of react. You choose instead of comply. You speak from clarity rather than urgency. And relationships become healthier because they are no longer used to fill inner emptiness. Silence is not withdrawal from life. It is a deeper engagement with it. It sharpens perception. It refines intuition. It creates space for truth. And in that space, you stop searching for yourself in others. There is a common belief that love requires sacrifice. And while that is partly true, it has often been misunderstood. Sacrifice has quietly turned into self-erasure. Caring has turned into enduring. And commitment has turned into tolerating what slowly wears you down. Many people grow up learning that to be loved they must give more, bend more, endure more. And without realizing it, they start confusing love with abandonment of self. Love. He should never ask you to disappear. It should not require you to silence your voice, minimize your needs, or betray your values just to keep a connection alive. When that happens, what you are practicing is not love, but emotional survival. You are staying not because you are fulfilled, but because you are afraid of losing the bond, the identity, or the sense of belonging that comes with it. Self-abandonment often begins subtly. You overlook a comment that hurt you. You excuse behavior that crossed the line. You tell yourself it's not that important, that you're being too sensitive, that love means understanding. And little by little, your inner world becomes smaller. You adapt so much that one day you realize you no longer recognize yourself in the relationship you are trying so hard to protect. When love costs you your dignity, it stops being nourishing. When caring for someone requires constant anxiety, self-doubt, or emotional exhaustion, something essential is missing. Healthy love does not require you to be in a permanent state of alert. It does not demand that you monitor every word, mood, or reaction. It allows you to rest. Many people fear that setting boundaries will push others away, and sometimes it does. But what often goes unnoticed is this truth. Anyone who leaves because you stopped abandoning yourself was never meeting you where you truly were. They were meeting the version of you that overextended, overgave, and stayed silent. Love is not measured by how much you endure, but by how safe you feel being yourself. It is not proven through suffering, but through mutual respect. When love is healthy, you don't have to choose between connection and self-respect. The two coexist naturally. Self-abandonment is usually rooted in fear of loss. The fear that if you say no, if you ask for more, if you express discomfort, you will be left behind. But this fear traps you in relationships where you are physically present but emotionally absent from yourself. And no connection is worth that cost. Caring for others should not mean neglecting your own emotional well-being. Love expands you. It does not shrink you. It gives you space to grow, to change, to express. It invites honesty, even when it is uncomfortable. Especially when it is uncomfortable, When you stop abandoning yourself, you don't become demanding or cold. You become clear. You stop hoping others will guess your needs and start honoring them yourself. You stop tolerating what hurts in the name of love and start choosing what aligns with your values. This shift can feel lonely at first because you are no longer over-functioning emotionally. You are no longer compensating for what is missing. And in that space, some relationships may change. But what remains will be real. Choosing yourself within love is not selfish. It is necessary. You cannot give from emptiness. You cannot love fully while betraying yourself. And the relationships that truly matter will not require you to be Anish in order to stay. There comes a moment when choosing yourself no longer feels like a rebellious act, but a necessary one. At first it can feel uncomfortable, even wrong. You may hear old voices in your mind telling you that you're being selfish, that you're changing, that you're becoming distant. But what is really happening is not withdrawal from others, it is a return to yourself. And that return is a sign of emotional maturity. For a long time, many people live in reaction mode. They respond to expectations, adapt to circumstances, and shape themselves around what is required of them. Decisions are made to keep the peace, to avoid conflict, to remain accepted. Over time, this way of living creates a quiet resentment, not always toward others, but towards yourself, a sense that you have compromised too much, too often. Choosing yourself interrupts this pattern. It means pausing before automatically saying yes. It means listening to your internal signals instead of overriding them. It means recognizing that your needs are not obstacles, but information. This shift doesn't make life easier at first, but it makes it more honest. Emotional maturity is not about being detached or indifferent. It is about being responsible for your inner world. When you choose yourself, you stop expecting others to regulate your emotions, validate your choices, or complete your sense of worth. You take ownership of your feelings and decisions, and with that ownership comes freedom. Many people fear that if they choose themselves, they will end up alone. But the opposite is often true. When you stop abandoning yourself, you stop attracting relationships that require self-erasure. You begin to connect from authenticity rather than need. And those connections, even if fewer, are deeper and more stable. Choosing yourself also means accepting consequences. Not everyone will understand your boundaries. Not everyone will applaud your growth. Some will resist the change because it disrupts old dynamics. Emotional maturity allows you to tolerate this discomfort without retreating into guilt. You understand that being misunderstood is sometimes the price of being true. There is also a profound calm that comes with self-alignment. Decisions stop feeling heavy. You no longer need to justify every choice. You trust your judgment, even when others disagree. This trust is not arrogance, it is self-respect. It grows from consistency between what you feel, think, and do. When you choose yourself, you stop living in anticipation of others' reactions. You act from intention rather than fear. You speak with clarity rather than hesitation. And this clarity changes how you experience life. You feel more present, more grounded, more at ease in your own skin. Emotional maturity recognizes that you can care deeply without losing yourself, that you can be kind without being compliant, that you can love without self-sacrifice. Choosing yourself does not close your heart, it stabilizes it. This choice also brings accountability. You can no longer blame others for your unhappiness. You begin to see where you stayed too long, where you didn't speak up, where you ignored your own limits. This awareness is not meant to shame you, but to empower you. You realize that you have more agency than you thought. As you continue choosing yourself, something subtle shifts. You stop chasing meaning and start embodying it. Your life becomes less about proving and more about living, less about being seen and more about seeing clearly. And in that clarity, peace finds you more often. Choosing yourself is not a single decision, it is a practice. One that requires patience, courage, and compassion. But each time you honor yourself, you strengthen your inner foundation. And from that foundation, everything else becomes more aligned.